What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/. All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. And as we have been saying for the past couple weeks, make sure to go subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/. All Steelers Talk Clips, for even more of us talking Pittsburgh Steelers. Today we got a show for you. Graham Barton, the Pittsburgh Steelers first round pick. Apparently the NFL already knows it's going to happen. We're going to dive into if that's a real possibility. And while there's a trade that is being rumored, that's being tossed around everywhere, that the Steelers could be set to make, and if they are set to make it, is Graham Barton still the pick? What is it going to cost the Steelers to possibly move backwards? And at what point do they consider making that a real possibility? Plus, Brandon Aiyuk is all over the headlines right now. The San Francisco 49ers don't seem to want to budge, but that's all right. I got some insight on when a deal could go down between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the San Francisco 49ers to acquire the superstar wide receiver and what it's going to cost the Steelers to make that move happen. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a little bit down the road. Before we dive into some trade talk, Nick, I don't know how it is down in DC, but it's been a beautiful week in the Berg. I hope everybody's getting outside and enjoying some of this. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling great. It has been beautiful down here as well. Had some family members come down and visit, so was busy.
Beautiful.
And if you know anything about DC, it is not the most walkable city. So I'm feeling it in my lower body right now. My legs, my calves, my shins, all sore, but I'm excited to talk some Steelers football, and I'm excited to be seated while talking some Steelers football.
Look, I feel you there. I was golfing yesterday, and everybody in the chat, maybe, you guys are just going to make fun of me, or maybe you'll agree with this one, but I was golfing yesterday, and everybody I was golfing with is like 3 years younger than me. And my back was locking up halfway through ninth hole. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to make it. It's not going to happen. They're like, you're so young. I'm like, dude, I'm dying over here. I don't know what to tell you. I hope I'm not alone. I hope there's a lot of people out there whose bodies feel like they're 60 when they're only 28. Maybe I'm just dying slowly, but I'm glad that you're feeling good. I'm glad that you got your steps in. I'm glad that you enjoyed your weekend. Let's talk some Pittsburgh Steelers trade action here. That's the biggest news, and Brandon Aiyuk is obviously all over the headlines, but this is a different one. This is a draft day trade that is right now just a rumor, just a hypothetical, toss it out there, but it's gaining some steam. Everybody's talking about it. What's it going to cost, and how real of a possibility could it be? And that is a trade between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Buffalo Bills. Von Miller sparked this the other day by dropping the Brandon Beane walking into the NFL draft day and trading up to go get a wide receiver to replace Stephon Diggs. And everybody starts freaking out. Oh, how far do they have to move up? Are they going to trade with the Steelers? Is that the team to move with? And then 93.7, the fans, Andrew Filipponi, which I know as soon as I mention that name, and I think I got a lot of respect for Pony, but I know as soon as I mention that name, people are going to say, oh, okay, whatever. He made it clear this was a rumor, but sometimes he knows his stuff, and sometimes he tosses some stuff out there that does come true. This time, it's a potential trade with the Buffalo Bills. He wrote this on Twitter yesterday, X, I guess, quote, rumored Steelers Bills draft pick trade to keep an eye on. Steelers trade the first round pick their 20th pick, and a fourth round pick, 98th overall, for the Bills' first, 28th, and second, pick 60. Would you make that deal? You're listening to that, you're thinking, okay, Steelers get a first and a second, they give up a first and a fourth. Before we dive into what that would be and how likely of a trade that possibly is right now, which I think it's actually more likely than maybe it seems, would you make that move if you were the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. The Steelers have a lot of needs to fill, but not a lot of high priority needs. Yeah, you need a center, but the centers, as we've seen, have been falling a lot. So it makes sense that if you can move back and get a third, second round pick,
yep.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense there, especially if that ends up being the cost, as we'll talk about, for Brandon Aiyuk. That way you can keep 2 second-round picks, and you can get Aiyuk for another random second-round pick as well. So I think it makes sense for the Steelers if that happens. But again, it all depends on how the board shakes out to that point. If centers start going early, it makes no sense for the Steelers to trade back and potentially lose out on one of the big 3 or big 2, however you see the center class this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends on who it's there, and I think that's where this conversation starts. Is you break down how the Steelers go about trading backwards. And I still remember the first time I was talking to Kevin Colbert nearing the draft, and he explained it to me that the Steelers every year, and I'm sure this has changed with Omar Khan, but I would believe the philosophy is pretty much the same. The Steelers every year, right before the draft, create their draft board. It is, if we picked a number one, this is who we would select. If we picked number two, this is who we would select. It's not by team, it's by the Pittsburgh Steelers. If they had every need available and this was their draft board, this is how it would go down. That's how they rank guys. Once it comes to their pick, if they have three or four guys that are ahead of where they currently are and maybe two or three behind where they currently are, they feel really good about making a move and trading backwards. Now, for the Steelers this year, I think that's a possibility, but it kind of depends on who's there. And it could also be the other way around. Is it slim pickings and the Steelers are just looking at it and saying, maybe it's not worth making a move right now or selecting a guy right now, but at 28, it could be a very valuable pick for us and for whoever's still on the board. Now it comes down to what player that is. Graham Barton's the name to watch. Jackson Powers-Johnson's another name to watch. Armarius Mims, obviously. I mean, you could get pretty crazy with the offensive tackles and the centers that are going to be there at 20 and whether or not they're worth the 20th pick or whether or not you should trade back and get them there. Read off a list because this is very important as well. Who picks between pick 21 and pick 28 that the Steelers would have to compete with to make a move or to land their guy?
The 21st pick is going to be the Miami Dolphins. You would imagine that the center, it might be on their trade board or on their draft board, excuse me. Yep. 22nd is Philadelphia, who just obviously had Jason Kelce retire. 23rd is Minnesota. 24th is the Dallas Cowboys. 25th is the Green Bay Packers. 26th is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And 27th is Arizona Cardinals, just before the Buffalo Bills at 28.
Yeah, so you got to be thinking that the Miami Dolphins, maybe the Eagles, possibly, I don't know who the Minnesota Vikings center is, but it used to be Brian Allen. At one point it was Mason Cole. I don't know who it is currently. You'd have to imagine that there's guys there. Now, just to tie into this, Tony Pauline of he's an NFL insider. I can never remember who he writes for at this point. Says that there's speculation around the NFL right now that the Pittsburgh Steelers know exactly who they're picking in the first round if that guy is available, and that is Graham Barton. Quote, speculation from people in the league familiar with the organization is that Graham Barton of Duke will likely be the pick. The reasoning is simple. Barton was an accomplished offensive tackle at Duke, offensive lineman at Duke, and projects to be a center in the NFL. The Steelers need help at both positions, and Barton's ability to line up at either makes him attractive. The Steelers wouldn't consider Barton as a tackle. They'd only consider him as a center. But it makes sense that he would be the pick. I mean, he was my guy in the last round or in the last mock draft. He probably remains my guy to this point, depending on who falls. If you get a guy like Quinion Mitchell, if you get a guy like Cooper DeJean, if you get a guy like, I mean, I don't know, the Penn State, I can never say his name. The Penn State offensive tackle, it continues to somehow fall backwards. And if that's a name that's still on the board, the Steelers consider that, and they probably make a move for one of those three guys. If not, Barton would probably be next on my list of just realistic possibilities for the Steelers. I'm not talking whether or not they should make the decision. I'm saying this is who, if I had to guess, is first on the Steelers' mind at pick 20, given the available options. Now, moving back to 28, are you comfortable saying maybe Barton's gone by pick 28, but Jackson Powers-Johnson, Armarius Mims, Tyler Guyton, Zach Frazier, obviously, all those guys are still available at 28. And on top of that, you get another second round pick. So you now go 1 first, 2 seconds, 2/3. I mean, that's not a bad place to be if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you give up Graham Barton potentially to make that move?
I would say so. I know Graham Barton has shot up everybody's draft boards of the last couple of weeks, but let's not forget the pedigree of some of these guys. And like you mentioned, the Steelers have more than one need. If they had, a solid left tackle right now that was a little bit higher than Dan Moore could give you, if they had, a better defensive tackle, if they had that answer at wide receiver, then you'd say, all right, get the best player at 20, which is Graham Barton, who's going to be the guy that is at the top of your board. But if you go back to 28 and give yourself an opportunity to get maybe two of Jackson Powers Johnson and Amarius Mims, then while, you're not getting the best possible player at that one position, you're filling multiple needs potentially for the future. So I would say that it's 100% something that if the board falls in that way, like you're mentioning, where a lot of these guys are falling, and while, yes, you might have to sacrifice Graham Barton, who is a stud, I'd still say it's better for your team in the long run to move back and be able to fill multiple holes with higher pedigree players, especially if you get that second round pick.
Yep. Look at I view Graham Barton as the guy. This is your next potential Marquise Pouncey. This is your next potential Hall of Fame center. This is the guy that you don't have to worry about the position anymore. I get it. And I argue against the whole, well, it's a center. You don't select centers in the first round, that the positional value isn't as high as other positions. I argue against that most times when I feel that Graham Barton is good enough to kind of overstep that boundary and say, whatever, dude, it's Graham Barton. This is a great pick. You go with a great pick. No need to take a risk. That changes when there are other potential options out there, when you can move back and get a second round pick. And now you're looking at it as Graham Barton and whoever you get in the second round, which at that point is most likely a corner or a wide receiver, because you're not going to take an offensive tackle at pick 51, or you're going to move up, compared to maybe an Armarius Mims or a Tyler Guyton at 28. And then you could make moves in the second round to add a center. And then you have a second round pick where you could get a guy like Malachi Corley or Roman Wilson or possibly Ladd McConkey, where you have better options in the second round, and you just added an offensive tackle and a center, and you still have 2 third-round picks. That's a game changer. If you could line up and you could walk away with, I don't know, let's say Mims is off the board, because I'm not sold on Mims falling just yet, but let's say Mims is off the board and you're going Tyler Guyton, Zach Frazier, because I don't believe the whole Zach Frazier is going to slide or climb his way into the first round. Not yet, at least. Zach Frazier in the second. We'll make it even better. Andrew Phillips in the second, and then you go into the third and you get, I don't know, again, Malachi Corley, Ricky Pearsall, and then you still have another pick to make in the third round. I mean, maybe I'm crazy. I'm saying that's a better move than just getting Graham Barton in the first round.
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to how many holes can you fill, especially for a team that is looking towards a Super Bowl this year. And if you fill those holes with first and second rounders, even if it's a later first round pick, you're still getting higher quality players that are more ready to come in and be a difference maker this year. Maybe not at the beginning, like we saw last year with Broderick Jones and Joey Porter Jr., who both stood on the sidelines at the start of the season, but people that by the end of the year, maybe even the playoffs, we saw it last year with Rashee Rice. Maybe by the end of the season, maybe by the playoffs, this is somebody that's going to be able to make a difference. And that's what you get in the second round. That's what you get even late in the first round, to get more of those options. I don't know how that's a bad thing for the Steelers. Yeah, you might miss on a guy like Graham Barton, and that might sting a little bit. But at the same time, if it gets you to where you want to go, at the end of the day, it gets you where you want to go.
That's what I'm saying. If your roster looks better at the end of the draft, your roster looks better. There's no way around it. And it could look this much better, or it could look this much better. And obviously you want it to look as good as it could possibly get. And the more draft picks you have, the better. I don't know. Omar Khan's a guy that always thinks 3 steps ahead. And when I tell you guys that this guy, every time I'm with Omar Khan, every single time, he is always on the phone. And I'm always making jokes with him. I'm always like, should I go get my laptop? Should I be prepared for something? Do I got to start calling sources? And he's like, nah. But he's as he's laughing, he's like, nah. I'm like, dude, you're obviously doing something. There's no way you're not. He always is 4 or 5 steps ahead. It's crazy how this guy operates. People have brought in the Brandon Aiyuk trade in the chat, and I appreciate that. I think that ties in perfectly, because I don't know if the Steelers trade for Brandon Aiyuk during the NFL draft. I would imagine that's the first big gap of like, hey, this could really happen. This is the first, like, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen right now. And I think Brandon Aiyuk goes for a second round pick. I don't think he goes for more than a second round pick. I look at that as if you can move back to 28 and make that move happen in the first round and then spend day 2, that 24-hour gap, negotiating trades for a wide receiver with the San Francisco 49ers, where maybe you give up a second and maybe a third. And that's like the max offer I would give up. I think it's going to be much less than that. But let's say it's a second and a third just to get crazy here. You still have a second and a third round pick. Like you could still, and you just added a wide receiver. You just added a wide receiver. You selected whoever in the first round, whether that be an offensive tackle or a center. You still have a second round pick and you have a third round pick available. I mean, the options that it opens up, the options that making that move from 20 to 28 opens up is crazy for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think it's a move that, depending on who's there, again, I could probably name 4 guys that are like realistic options. Cooper DeJean's probably one of them. Quinion Mitchell, I don't think is gonna fall, but I mean, maybe he falls. There's like the slight, slim chance that Troy Fatanu falls to 20, and the Steelers love Troy Fatanu, so I could see maybe that's a name. Besides that, I don't. Maybe Terrion Arnold. Maybe Terrion Arnold, and I think that he has a shot of getting to 20. But I'm not totally convinced that the Steelers love him as much as they love Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell. And I think if it's not those 4 guys, realistic 4 guys, there's nothing holding the Steelers back from making a move out of 20 back to however far back you can possibly get. And I think that's I don't know. We'll know more when Omar and Mike talk during their NFL draft, and they won't give us anything good, but you'll kind of get a hint of like how many people have called and, you know, is it real that this team could be building? But I would expect the Bills to be aggressive. And I think Omar Khan and Brandon Beane working together, like it's, you know, you're putting the ingredients in the pot for a draft day trade. And I could see those two happening. And again, Graham Barton, I think, is a great move, but I'm moving back to get more options. And I'm feeling really good about that selection. I'm even feeling good about that selection if Cooper DeJean's on the board, if Quinion, like if all those guys are on the board and you still move back, I wouldn't argue with the move. I would look at it and say, you got better value. You know, you got more picks. It's a good draft class. It's a good top heavy draft class. The first 3 rounds are really good in this draft. The rest of them, but the first 3 rounds have a lot of talent, especially in the positions that the Steelers need outside of offensive tackle. So that's the move. Let's talk a little bit of Brandon Aiyuk because we brought him up, and I think that Brandon Aiyuk is a name that people have a lot of questions about. And, you know, you're talking about trade partners, you're talking about the Buffalo Bills, you're talking about moving back from 20 to 28, and then everybody brings up like, oh, well, you could trade for Brandon Aiyuk. Like I said, I think the NFL draft is the first spot that Brandon Aiyuk could be moved at. That's the first time that I think the window is like fully open for a move. And no matter what the San Francisco 49ers have to say about it, they'll consider a move. Obviously, Ian Rappaport went on NFL Total Access, I believe, today and said that the 49ers have been getting trade requests and getting calls, but they haven't entertained anything. I've been told a lot of the same stuff, that teams are calling, that the Steelers are calling, that they've called multiple times over the last couple months, and the 49ers continue to say somewhat of the same things. Look at Brandon Aiyuk and us want to get a trade or get a deal done. If we get a deal done, this shuts everything down. The Steelers aren't convinced that a deal is going to get done. I'm not convinced that a deal is going to get done. I look at the situation as this. Brandon Ayuk's first possibility of being traded comes during the NFL draft. And if a team wants to overpay for him with a first-round pick, so be it. Steelers missed out. No big deal. The Steelers aren't going to give up a first-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. They might give up a second-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk, and that could happen within that 24-hour window of day 1 and day 2, which, if, you know, we know how the Steelers operate, that's when it's going to happen, right when everybody's sleeping, 3 a.m, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, Mike Tomlin, and Omar Khan are the only people awake in the whole world, and they're making deals happen at 4 a.m. I think that that's the first window of opportunity. If it doesn't happen there, don't give up on it. I think that this could happen during training camp. I think once a hold-in becomes imminent, I believe that once they realize, that's when it's going to happen. Once the San Francisco 49ers give up and they say, this isn't going to happen, this is just becoming a hassle, we're about to lose him for nothing next season, and he's not going to play this year, that's when the Steelers are going to pounce. And I think the Steelers are the favorites to land him. I've been told by sources that they would be surprised if it didn't happen, but when it's going to happen, we don't know. Nobody knows. I would say if it doesn't happen during the draft, this conversation is going to go on until August. And then at that point, if a deal doesn't get done, that window is very much so open. I mean, I don't know. Even if you, two questions here. Even if Aiyuk's not on the table, you still making that trade in the first round? And then if you're looking at Aiyuk past the NFL draft, is his value the same, second round pick in 2025, if August comes around?
To answer the first question, I'm still trading back. I still think that is a good option for the Steelers because, I mean, we talked about it even outside the scope of a guy like Brandon Aiyuk. It helps to have that pick if you want to get Aiyuk because then you still have assets at disposal during this year's draft. But I think that even without the trade of Aiyuk, the same rules apply there. I mean, we were talking about it gets them more opportunities in those first 3 rounds that you said are really good this year. And you're right, because those first 3 rounds all have players that have at the very least potential to develop into good NFL players. So if you get more of those players, it's never a bad thing, especially if everything shakes out where they have so many options at 20 that trading back just makes sense to 28 and getting more of those second round picks, those third round picks. So yeah, I would say it still makes sense. And to answer your second one, if it gets past the NFL draft, does it make sense? Does the price stay the same for Brandon Aiyuk? I think the price goes down, and you and Steven said this yesterday. The price goes down the longer he doesn't have a contract because San Francisco loves to play hardball. They do it with all their star players. This is nothing new for them. But what's new is the star player going into the media and saying, I don't know, I'd want to be traded if they're not going to give me what I want. And saying all those things and going on Instagram, I don't know how that plays in. It's just a different person negotiating in a different way. But I would say that the price remains the same. But I would say the likelihood of that trade gets higher and higher the closer you get to training camp without a deal.
Yes. The 49ers play hardball. They've played hardball with numerous guys in the past, and I expect them, like John Lynch is a great GM. So I'm not looking at this saying John Lynch isn't going to get a deal done. But I think it's so difficult to pay 2 wide receivers on top of everybody else that they're paying on that team. It's got to be nearly impossible to figure out how to give a second wide receiver $30 million a year. That just doesn't make sense. And I get it. People are saying, well, the Super Bowl window's open right now. I agree. That's why I think that August is probably your most likely situation when it comes to a trade here, because at that point, they're going to be looking at it and they're going to say, what are our options here? He's going to hold out for the season, which we know guys will hold out for the season. And that's what they're going to work with, is just a guy that they're going to lose in a year and he's not going to help them at all in 2024. Or are they going to look at it and say, well, let's get a second round pick and see how long we could carry this and keep this going and, kind of go from there. I think a lot of things come into play here, but I think that if San Francisco, feels it, they'll draft a wide receiver and you'll see them draft a wide receiver. And then everybody's going to go, whoa, what's happening now? And that's when it's going to start to become a real possibility. The draft is right now, it's too early. The 49ers are going to hunker down. The more moves that are made, the closer we get to Brandon Aiyuk not playing and the 49ers being comfortable with Brandon Aiyuk not playing, the more realistic this becomes. And compensation wise, second round pick in 2025 seems very good. I could see even a third round pick in 2025 and maybe a third round pick in 2026 if that's where we're going. But I'm not giving up on a Brandon Aiyuk trade. Not happening. Shout out to Evan here. Anybody looking for a Chase Claypool or George Pickens jersey, make an offer. George Pickens jersey is still worth a lot. I wouldn't be giving up a George Pickens jersey just yet. Let's keep things going here. We got any questions?
We do got a couple of questions here. First one came in pretty early from Still Cold. Says, can Trice play the slot? Talking about Corey Trice, the cornerback.
No, he's an outside guy. He's lengthy. He's real big. I don't think he's a slot guy. He doesn't have much experience in the slot. I'll say this. I've talked to some people just trying to gauge some interest on where Corey Trice sits with this team and what his potential outlook is for 2024. And I think that's where we are, is it's just a potential out. Like nobody has any idea. They're looking at him and saying, we like Corey Trice, but he's been injury ridden for years now. He's 2 ACLs and a fractured ankle. Like it's not looking good. They hope that he could turn into something. He looked impressive during OTAs and minicamp last year and during the first week of training camp, and they want him to be a depth piece. But I would not hold any expectations that Corey Trice walks into the training camp this year and has any role on this defense. He's got to earn every piece that he gets, and he's got to stay healthy. And the Steelers are not going to bank on him being healthy and available. They're going to look to replace him, or not replace him, but have another option there where Corey can move his way into like the fourth corner role, but not a starting spot in the slot. I'll toss a name out there, though, and I just wrote this story today. Daxton Hill in Cincinnati. We're going to talk about it a lot tomorrow on the podcast, but Daxton Hill is a name to watch. He got replaced in Cincinnati this year at safety. Mike Hilton's playing slot corner. The Bengals don't have a spot for him. And if he's looking for a role somewhere, why not make a move for him if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? I could see if this was T. Higgins, the likelihood of an AFC North trade is low. If this is a guy that the Bengals are just going to sit on the bench and they say, hey, look, he didn't really work out for us, they'd trade him. They'd trade him to the Steelers. And I think that's a move that it's got potential.
I like it. Dyron's House says, if the Steelers trade down, they'll take Adonai Mitchell. What do you think of the Steelers taking Adonai Mitchell late in the first round, if they indeed do the Buffalo Bills trade at 28?
I think this is a likely possibility. I do think this is a likely possibility. I think the Steelers love Mitchell. I don't think they love him at 20, but I think if he's one of those names where when they look at their draft board and they're sitting there at 20 trying to come up with a trade and how far back they could go, he's going to be there. And they're going to say, if he's there at 28, we feel good about that. If he's there at 28, if Mims is there at 28, if Guyton's there at 28, I don't know, maybe Brian Thomas is there at 28, Kool-Aid McKinstry's there at 28. Like that's the group of guys that I say the Steelers would move back to try and land. Mitchell is maybe first on that list, maybe second behind Mims. The Steelers like Mitchell, and Mitchell plays a really good role. And I could see that happen. I could definitely see them trading back to get Adonai Mitchell.
Sajan wants to know, apologies if this has already been covered on Aiyuk, but how does he fit into the Arthur Smith offense, in your opinion? He knows he's a great receiver, but just not sure how he works with the Arthur Smith mold.
I think the best part about Brandon Aiyuk coming to Pittsburgh would be the fact that they have George Pickens and Brandon Aiyuk run blocking on the outside. Could you imagine? Like the viral clip of Brandon Aiyuk last year bulldozing people 15 yards down the field is like, that is a Pittsburgh dream right there. And George Pickens, I get it. George had his moments last year where he gave up on plays, and I think he's got some attitude concerns, but I also think that the Steelers are working on those attitude concerns. And I think that having a guy like Brandon Aiyuk around, having a new coach like Zach Azzani, having a new offensive coordinator like Arthur Smith. Like Arthur Smith's the type of guy that I think this is no nonsense. This is, we are playing football. I will bench you if you are not out here giving 100%. I could see George Pickens growing a lot in year 3. I think, Brandon Aiyuk and George Pickens run blocking would be incredible. And then you have 2 deep threats, 2 good route runners. I think George Pickens' versatility is going to be utilized a lot more this season than it was in Matt Canada's offense. Brandon Aiyuk is as versatile as they come. He could play a Deontay Johnson role. He could play a deep threat. He could play an over-the-middle type of guy. He can move to the slot if you need him to move inside. I think George Pickens can do all those things too. I think he's a perfect fit for what the Steelers are looking for, and he's physical. And that's why he's top on my list for the Steelers. That's why he's been top on the Steelers list when it comes to a trade, is because Brandon Aiyuk is a physical wide receiver that they could turn into exactly what they're looking for. And I think he fits Arthur Smith's offense beautifully.
Some more wide receivers questions here. Tiemann says, is it possible that the Steelers trade for Davante Adams?
Me and you talked about Davante Adams. I would love a Davante Adams trade. I think he makes a ton of sense. He shut down some rumors, I think, yesterday, saying at a youth football camp that he is not going anywhere and that if he wanted to go somewhere, that it would have already happened. So I don't think that's a possibility. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Steelers. I think that his cap hit this year isn't massive. What he's going to be worth isn't going to be a whole ton. I'd give up a second-round pick for 1 year with Davante Adams. I wouldn't even think twice about it. but I don't think it. I would say it's not going to happen. Not on the Steelers side, but more on the Raiders side.
James has a wide receiver question as well, saying, do you make the trade with the Bills and then use a 3rd-round pick for Courtland Sutton?
I mean, why not? Why not? I think Courtland Sutton's worth the 3rd-round pick. I mean, his cap hit's not incredibly high, and for a 3rd-round pick, I'd take Courtland Sutton. I'd feel really good about that. I think that's a good move. I don't see why not. If you could get 2 2nd-round picks, a 1st-round pick, 1/3, and Courtland Sutton, not a bad day in the office. I think the Steelers would be pretty all right with that. Courtland Sutton does a lot of good things. I get that he hasn't worked out in Denver, but he's really had like 1 year with a good quarterback, 1.5 years, and Russell kind of stunk in Denver for a minute there. And he's dealt with some injury issues. I'm a big Courtland Sutton guy. I think he's got potential if he could stay healthy. I mean, for a 3rd-round pick, easy, no questions asked. I think that would be great.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I like a Courtland Sutton trade. And you look at where he was typecast in Denver. He was the number 1 receiver on a team that didn't have a running game. He comes to Pittsburgh. He's a number 2 receiver that has a running game and a quarterback that he already has a chemistry with. I don't know.
And an offensive line.
And an offensive line, at least a better offensive line than Denver.
Yes.
I feel like that could be a recipe for success for Courtland Sutton, and especially if you get him for a 3rd-round pick.
That's what I'm saying. And on top of that, like I mean, that team was a mess a year ago. Not this past season. They started to work better. But the year before, I mean, Nathaniel Hackett just screwed everything up. So he'd come into an offense that actually has an offensive coordinator. I mean, big things. I would expect big things from Courtland Sutton. I love that move.
We got another question here about a wide receiver. Inferno Start says, what do you think about the Steelers going after somebody like Kadarius Toney?
No. No. The answer is just no. Like, I don't know what, like, I lost my, just personally, okay? And I'll be logical about this too, but just personally, I had Kadarius Toney in my starting lineup week 1 of the NFL season. He had the lowest receiver rating of all time in NFL history. I watched this guy drop pass after pass after pass after pass. There is a reason he was on the bench in this, like, throughout the playoffs. Just no. Just, you don't want a guy with attitude issues. You don't want a guy who gives up on plays. You don't want a guy with drop issues. Kadarius Toney, I mean, that's all 3. That's the big 3 that the Pittsburgh Steelers have been. You're pretty much getting 20 times worse. Like Deontay Johnson's worst season, which I think the Deontay Johnson criticism was so overblown. It's crazy. Like, so overblown. It's crazy. At his peak of drops, Kadarius Toney's 10 times worse. No chance. Just no.
We do have a couple more questions here before we go. Still Cold has another question, says, does Patrick Queen end up wearing the green dot if you had to guess today?
Yes, I think so. I think he's going to be your linebacker, your inside linebacker 1. I would guess Landon Roberts is your inside linebacker 2, and then Cole Holcomb's your inside linebacker 3. I would imagine all 3 of them could wear the green dot, but if Patrick Queen's healthy, he'll be the guy. Landon Roberts will be number 2. All 3 of them have play calling ability, so I would expect all 3 of them to be able to wear the dot and switch off when needed. But if Patrick Queen's on the field, he'll be the guy.
As we learned last year, not bad to have a couple of guys with that capability.
No. I still remember talking to Minkah Fitzpatrick and him being like, yeah, dude, I'm calling plays, then running back, trying to read an offense and direct people where to go. It was a nightmare. I was like, yeah, I could only imagine how terrible that is.
Daniel Porter has a draft question here, says, what do you think of somebody like Mason McCormick in the 4th round?
I like Mason McCormick. I think the Steelers have interest in Mason McCormick. I don't think it would be a bad move. I view him more as like a backup plan if the first round of offensive linemen aren't there, if like the first wave of these are our guys kind of come and go quicker than the Steelers imagine. I could see Mason McCormick being on their list. I could also see him being like a mid-round pick that the Steelers add to add some depth, but I think they feel really good about their depth. And I think that they have options. So I could see McCormick. I mean, they're doing their homework on McCormick, and they're going to continue to view him as an option. But that's if the first wave of guys is not there. But I like Mason McCormick. I think he's got a lot of potential. And for where he's going to go, like, I don't know. What the year they drafted Chooks because he had a lot of upside. McCormick, I kind of see the same way. Like, he's got the potential to be a starter in the NFL one day, even if it's not today.
Sejan has another one about Brandon Aiyuk saying, based on the toughness you described earlier, could he be a Hines Ward style receiver that the Steelers have been missing?
Yes. I mean, way better. And that's no criticism to Hines Ward. Hines Ward was my favorite receiver of all time. He's, in my opinion, like 1B to Antonio Brown as the greatest Steelers wide receiver of all time. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, should be in the Hall of Fame. It's ridiculous that he's not. The wide receivers get gypped in the Hall of Fame, and it's nonsense. But I could see Brandon Aiyuk. Like, Brandon Ayuk's just such a good, crazy wide receiver threat and plays physical. He's not going to be nobody's ever going to be as physical as Hines Ward, ever. And to ever say that somebody is a slap in the face to Hines Ward. But he'll be physical. He'll be the physical guy that the Steelers are looking for. He plays Pittsburgh Steelers style football. I agree with that.
Quentin has a question here. Says, if the Steelers do trade for Aiyuk, do they still draft a wide receiver at some point?
I would say yes. I would say that that's still a really big possibility, is the Steelers add somebody maybe in the mid rounds. You know, you're looking at a Ricky Pearsall, who Trez Walker out of North Carolina could be on that list. I could see some of those guys being an option. I think the Steelers still look for a wide receiver 3, kind of hope Calvin Austin turns into a wide receiver 3/4 and move it from there. They're not looking to walk into the season with the current depth chart and just one other guy. They want 2 more names and then have Quez Watkins, Calvin Austin, which I think has a pretty big upper hand in this list, in this race, but he's still going to have to compete, and Van Jefferson are going to compete for those final roster spots. But I would say yes. I still feel very confident the Steelers would add a wide receiver in the draft if they trade for Aiyuk beforehand or during.
Pittsburgh Hornets has a quarterback question here. We've talked a couple of times about potentially late round quarterback for the Steelers to fill out their number 4. He asks, who do you see the Steelers picking up later in the draft? Do you think Spencer Rattler is an option?
I don't think Spencer Rattler is an option. I think Joe Milton might be an option. Rattler's going to go way before the end of the draft. He's going to go 4th, maybe 3rd round, depending on how high he could climb in the next week. I could see Joe Milton if he's in the 6th. Late round draft picks are a huge toss up. It's just kind of like, hey, okay, here it is. Here's my best guess. I could see, you want a name to watch? Josh Proctor out of Ohio State. Versatile defensive back, could play up and back. Kind of gives me like less physical Mike Hilton vibes. I could see that being a name to watch, but quarterback wise, Joe Milton would really be the only person that I see on my list.
We also got one here from Adam, a nice little hypothetical for you. If Cooper DeJean, Talise Fuaga, and Quinion Mitchell are all there at 20, big if, but if they're all there at 20, what are you doing?
I'm going Quinion Mitchell. I think Quinion Mitchell is like potentially like the best defensive player in this draft. I think he's got that upside. I wouldn't say the best player in this draft. I think Caleb Williams is a monster, whether you like him or not. I would say Quinion Mitchell is the best defensive player in the draft, or pretty close to it. I don't think there's any, like, he's physical, he's fast, he's versatile, he's shifty with his hips, he's great at reading the ball. I'm a big Quinion guy. I would go Quinion. My second option would, oh man, that would be tough. I would say that would be so hard. I would say Fuaga would be my second option, just because I think I think there's a little bit of a drop off. I just think value of corner versus value of offensive tackle are two different things, and I value an offensive tackle more, and I think Fuaga is going to be a great offensive tackle. So I would go Mitchell, Fuaga, DeJean, and that hurts me to say. If you've been watching this podcast, you know that hurts me to say.
Barkaholic had a comment here that you highlighted. Aiyuk, Devontae Adams. The Steelers don't have that bling under the salary cap. Something tells me you might disagree.
Yes, I do. And I this is a good point, and I want, like, it's a really good comment to make, so that's why I wanted to make sure that it's addressed, at least when it comes to the Brandon Aiyuk situation. It would happen with most trades. I don't know the specifics of a Devontae Adams trade, but But when it comes to Brandon Aiyuk, I was told by sources that the Steelers would not take on that full contract. They wouldn't even take on half. That the 49ers would take on a huge chunk of that the financial situation, it would be just like their trade, where in that trade, you're also negotiating who takes on what side of the salary. The Steelers would make that happen with both. So that $14 million cap hit would probably be somewhere around, I don't know, $7 to $9 million, which again, the Steelers only have like 11 million bucks available, but they could create $10 million for their draft class and then figure the rest out with restructures to TJ and Minka and Alex Highsmith and Cam Hayward. And it could happen. It's very easy to make happen. And I wouldn't expect the Steelers to take on any large cap hit fully with the wide receiver trade.
We got two more questions here. One from Austin talking about Zach Zinter was a highly rated guard who suffered a bad injury. Could he be a day one talent for a day three pick? And what do you think of that for the Steelers, even if he doesn't play in year one?
Yeah, Zinter kind of surprised me with how far he did fall in this draft class. I thought somebody's going to take a shot at him somewhere. I think the Steelers could take a shot at him. I haven't heard much interest in the Steelers. And when it comes to Zach Zinter, I think he's a good player. I think that he's got a ton of upside and that he could make a lot out of his NFL career. It's a big question mark. And that kind of just comes down to like, where are you drafting? Are you drafting him round 4? If that's the case, what other positions do you still need in this draft? But I think that if the Steelers find themselves in a spot where the offensive linemen haven't fallen the way that they want them to, he could be an option. He could be a longer term option. He could be a guy like, here's the thing is that if you looked at him and said, okay, he's the replacement to an Isaac Seumalo in 2 years, I'd be like, that's awesome. But I think the Steelers want Nate Herbig to be that replacement in 2 years. He's only 25 years old. He'd be 27 by the time that Seumalo's contract's over. I could see Zinter being that guy. It just kind of depends on how the draft board falls. But I agree with you. I think he's got a ton of potential in the NFL. I think whoever gets him, you're going to have to hope that he could recover well enough to be a starter long term. But if you're willing to take that chance, I mean, he's got a ton of upside. He was a first, just like you said, he's a first round pick a year ago. Potentially like one of the first linemen off the board.
Speaking of falling in the draft, let's close it out with this one. Adam Lowe says, I've also done a bunch of mock drafts, and Zach Frazier keeps falling at 84. Do you think that's an actual possibility?
No. You got to be careful where you do this. And I respect the mock draft simulator game because I do it constantly, but you have to be careful about where you're going. Like PFN is a good one. I love PFN's draft simulator, but the way I look at it is they're not always updated, week by week, day by day. So a lot of those rankings are still months old. So a guy like Zach Frazier might be ranked like 60th, and that's why he's falling. And that's, I don't see him at 84. I could see him at 51. I don't think he makes it to the third round. I don't even think it comes close. I would be shocked if the Steelers don't try to trade up to get him or Jackson Powers-Johnson in the second round because they're so uneasy about him falling to 51. But I respect the game. I definitely respect the game.
Alrighty, I think that is, if I look through again, I think that's all we got today.
Word. Just want to say this, Sean, we just talked about it. Rewind like 3 minutes and you'll catch how they can make that happen. With that said, thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. This is a blast as always. It's a beautiful day outside, and I want to say that before we head out. Make sure that if you are in the city of Pittsburgh to go get some sun rays because it's a good day to go get some sun out there, perk up your spring, and just enjoy a beautiful day in the Burgh, as we say every single day. Make sure to find us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. Please go subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more of this podcast dropping Monday through Friday. We will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Burgh. Peace.